The neighborhood of wrong turns. My name is Logan. I've spent the last 8 years driving long-haul freight across the American Southwest. When you're behind the wheel of a semi-truck for 14 hours a day, the road becomes a sort of meditation. You memorize the cracks in the asphalt, the specific flicker of neon signs in lonely truck stops, and the way the desert sky shifts from bruised purple to obsidian. I take pride in my navigation. I don't just rely on GPS. I carry a physical atlas, and I know every back road from Phoenix to Salt Lake City. But 3 nights ago, while hauling a load of industrial equipment through a remote stretch of Nevada, the road decided to change the map. I was about 60 miles outside of any recorded town when I hit a detour sign. It was a standard orange pylon, looking official enough, pointing me down a freshly paved asphalt road that cut deep into a valley I didn't remember being there. I figured it was a shortcut or a new bypass. The road led me into what looked like a brand new suburban development. It was eerie. Thousands of acres of perfectly manicured lawns, white picket fences, and 2-story colonial houses, all tucked away in a place where the dirt shouldn't support a single blade of grass. I slowed the rig down to 15 miles per hour. The streetlights were on, casting a harsh, buzzing yellow glow over the pavement. But as I rolled past the houses, that wrongness, the feeling that's kept me alive in the desert, started screaming in my ears. I looked at the houses. They were beautiful, but they were incomplete. I passed a house with a swing set in the front yard, but the swings were made of solid, unpainted concrete. I saw a house with a welcome mat, but the door was painted onto the siding. There was no handle, no hinges, just a flat surface. One house had a bicycle leaning against a tree, but when my headlights hit it, I realized the frame was fused directly into the bark, as if the tree had grown around the bike in a single second. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice sounding thin in the cab. I reached a cul-de-sac, a perfect circle of asphalt at the end of the street. I went to pull a U-turn, but as I swung the trailer around, I saw a figure standing on the sidewalk. It looked like a mailman. He had the blue uniform, the pith helmet, and the leather bag. But he wasn't moving. He was standing perfectly still, facing a brick wall where a mailbox should have been. As my truck rumbled past, the mailman turned his head. He didn't have a neck. His entire torso twisted at a 90-degree angle, his spine making a sound like dry wood snapping. He didn't have eyes, just 2 smooth, skin-covered indentations where a face should be. He opened his mouth. It wasn't a human mouth. It was a vertical slit that stretched from his chin to his forehead. "Logan, your delivery is late," the mailman said. The voice didn't come from him. It came from the speakers of my truck's radio, even though the power was turned off. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it, the engine roaring as I raced back the way I came. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the road I'd just driven on wasn't there anymore. It was just more houses. Identical, windowless, doorless houses stretching out into the dark in every direction. I kept my foot heavy on the pedal, the diesel engine of my semi-truck screaming as I tried to outrun the shifting geography. But no matter how many turns I took, the landscape remained the same. endless rows of those silent, wrong houses. Every street sign I passed was blank, just a rectangular slab of green metal with no text, reflecting my high beams like a dead eye. Then, the dashboard chimed. A low, persistent ping that sent a chill down my spine. My fuel gauge, which had been at 3/4 when I entered this valley, was plunging toward empty. The needle was moving visibly, as if something beneath the truck was drinking the diesel straight out of the tanks. "Not now," I hissed, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Not here." I pulled over in front of a house that looked slightly more complete than the others. It had a porch light, a real one that flickered with a warm orange glow, and a driveway that didn't look like it was made of painted plastic. I hopped out of the cab, my boots hitting the pavement with a sound that was too muffled, like I was walking on heavy carpet instead of asphalt. I walked to the side of my truck to check the fuel lines. They weren't leaking. Instead, I saw thick, translucent veins like giant ivy growing out of the pavement and fused into my fuel tank. They were pulsating, a dull green light moving through them as they siphoned the liquid. "Hey! Get away from there!" I shouted, though I knew there was no one to hear me. I grabbed a crowbar from my external toolbox and swung at the veins. The moment the steel hit the growth, the entire neighborhood reacted. Every porch light on the street flickered in unison. The sound that came next wasn't a scream. It was the sound of 1,000 television sets turning to static at once. "Logan, you look tired," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the radio this time. It came from the house in front of me. The front door, the one that had no handle, suddenly swung open. Inside, the house was filled with a warm, golden light. I could smell bacon frying and fresh coffee. It was a smell so familiar, so comforting, that for a split second, I forgot about the mailman with the vertical mouth and the fuel-drinking veins. I saw a table set for one, a steaming plate of food, and a recliner just like the one in my father's old house. But when I looked closer, the bacon on the plate was moving, its edges curling and uncurling like a cluster of small worms. The coffee in the mug was thick and black, bubbling with a slow, oily consistency. I backed away, but the driveway began to soften beneath my feet. The asphalt was turning into a dark, viscous liquid, pulling at my boots. "You're not a house," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You're a trap." I looked up at the second-story window of the house. A figure was standing there. It looked like a young woman, but her proportions were all wrong. Her arms were too long, reaching down past her knees, and her hair wasn't hair. It was hundreds of thin, swaying wires that plugged directly into the ceiling. She pressed her face against the glass. She didn't have a nose, just a flat, smooth surface of skin. She tapped on the window with a finger that had 3 too many joints. Tap, tap, tap. Stay, Logan. The routine is safe. Here, no more roads. Just end the house. The streetlights began to dim, and as they did, the houses began to move. They weren't sliding, they were growing, their foundations stretching and expanding, closing the gaps between them until the street I was standing on became a narrow, dark hallway made of suburban facades. The walls of the houses were closing in, the vinyl siding groaning and stretching like skin being pulled over a drum. The hallway of facades was now so narrow that the side mirrors of my semi-truck were scraping against the fake brickwork, producing a sound like a fingernail dragging across a chalkboard. The air was getting thick, smelling of wet drywall and a cloying, sugary rot. "You want the fuel?" I growled, stumbling back into the cab. "Then take all of it." I knew the biology of this place, or whatever passed for biology, thrived on consistency. It wanted my routine, my diesel, and my stillness. It didn't want chaos. And it certainly didn't want a localized inferno. I reached behind the driver's seat and grabbed my emergency flare kit and a gallon of industrial-grade degreaser I kept for cleaning engine parts. My hands were shaking, but the Logan that had survived 10 winters in the Rockies took over. I soaked a heavy rag in the degreaser, shoved it into the neck of the fuel tank where those translucent veins were still pulsing, and struck the flare. The magnesium flare hissed with a blinding, white-hot intensity. "Dinner served," I whispered, and I dropped the flare into the soaked rag. Whoosh! The explosion wasn't massive, but the heat was immediate. The diesel didn't just burn, it reacted with the organic veins. The neighborhood let out a sound that I hope I never hear again, a collective, subterranean shriek that vibrated through my very teeth. The houses around me didn't burn like wood, they blistered. The white siding bubbled and turned into a black, oily liquid that smelled of burning hair. The woman in the second-story window let out a sound like a broken violin, her wire hair snapping and coiling as the heat disrupted her connection to the ceiling. The driveway beneath the truck, which had been turning into a swamp of asphalt, suddenly hardened and cracked. The simulasi was breaking. For a split second, the golden light of the houses flickered and died, revealing what was underneath. Massive, rib-like structures of gray calcium and pulsating valves of raw muscle. I wasn't in a neighborhood. I was inside a gullet. "Move, you piece of junk. Move." I slammed the truck into reverse, the tires spinning on the charred remains of the driveway. The heat from the burning fuel tank was melting the plastic of the dashboard, but I didn't care. I felt the truck break free from the veins. I didn't follow the streets anymore. I drove the semi-truck straight through the front wall of the colonial house across the street. The structure collapsed like it was made of thin cardboard and dried meat. I kept the pedal to the floor, crashing through fences made of calcified bone and lawns made of green mold. The sky above began to tear. The obsidian blackness was replaced by a pale, flickering gray, the color of a monitor with no signal. I was breaking through the edge of the valley, but as I reached the perimeter, a new sound began. It wasn't a scream or a whistle. It was a voice, my own voice, coming from the air vents of the truck, calm and professional. "Dispatch to Logan. You are en route. Please pull over and wait for the maintenance crew. The routine must not be interrupted. Pull over, Logan. Pull over." I looked ahead and saw a final obstacle, a perfect replica of my own childhood home, sitting right in the middle of the exit ramp, the front door open, and the lights on inside. The replica of my childhood home stood directly in my path, bathed in the soft, warm glow of a porch light I hadn't seen in 20 years. It was perfect down to the chipped blue paint on the shutters, and the specific way the screen door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. It was a masterpiece of mimicry, a final, desperate attempt to trigger the one routine I couldn't ignore, the urge to go home. "Logan, dinner's getting cold." My mother's voice drifted through the truck's air vents, layered over the sound of a crackling fire. "Just park the rig, honey. You've been driving for so long." My foot wavered on the accelerator. Every instinct in my body, every mile of exhaustion stored in my bones, wanted to believe it. I wanted to step out of the burning cab, walk through that crooked screen door, and let the darkness take the weight of the road off my shoulders. But then I saw the grass in the front yard. It wasn't grass. It was a carpet of thin, translucent needles that were slowly pulsing in time with the flickering gray sky. "My mother died 10 years ago," I whispered, my voice sounding like a stranger's. "And she never lived in a house that breathed." I closed my eyes and slammed my foot to the floor. The impact didn't sound like wood and glass shattering. It sounded like a heavy boot stepping into a deep, wet marsh. The truck groaned as it plowed through the center of the house, the walls giving way like layers of damp fat. For a terrifying second, the cab was filled with the scent of lavender and old paper, before being replaced by the acrid, burning stench of my own fuel tank. Then, the world snapped. The pressure in my ears equalized with a painful pop. The sound of the screaming neighborhood vanished, replaced by the steady, rhythmic hum of tires on real, cracked asphalt. I opened my eyes and saw the white lines of Highway 50 stretching out under the pale, honest light of a Nevada moon. I didn't stop. I drove that charred, smoking rig for another 50 miles until I reached a well-lit truck stop near Austin. I pulled into the far corner of the lot, killed the engine, and just sat there in the silence, watching the steam rise from the hood. When the sun finally came up, I climbed out to inspect the damage. The truck was a wreck. The fuel tank I'd set on fire was a blackened shell, but it wasn't just burned, it was covered in a thin, leathery film that looked like dried skin. The front bumper was filled with a gray, porous substance that looked like bone marrow, and on the passenger side door, there was a single, muddy handprint. It wasn't a handprint from a woman or a child. It was a print with 7 fingers, each one ending in a jagged, black point. I never reported the incident. Who would I tell? The company would have fired me for operator negligence, and the police would have put me in a ward. I just told them a brush fire had clipped the rig while I was sleeping in a turnout. They bought it. I still drive for a living, but I don't take detours anymore. I don't care if the road is blocked by a rock slide or a collapsed bridge. I stay on the marked path. I've become obsessed with maps, real paper maps. I check the topography, the coordinates, and the history of every mile I travel. Because I know that the valley is still out there. It's not a place you find, it's a place that finds you when your routine becomes too predictable. It's a predator that builds itself out of your comfort zone, waiting for you to take that one wrong turn. Every time I pass a new suburban development, one of those places where all the houses look identical and the lawns are too green, I feel a cold, vibrating pressure in my chest. I look at the windows and wonder if anyone is actually living inside, or if they're just units being digested by something much larger. And sometimes when I'm driving late at night and the radio starts to hiss with static, I'll hear a voice. It's not my mother's voice anymore. It's my own voice, professional and calm, coming from the empty passenger seat. Logan, you're almost there. Just turn right at the next blank sign. We've updated the delivery address. I just turn up the volume on my old cassette tapes and keep my eyes on the white lines. I don't look in the rearview mirror anymore. Because in the desert, the mirages don't just disappear when you drive past them. Sometimes they start following you home.